I have a question for you. Why do you think you keep going back to this relationship over and over again? It's kind of like when you watch a horror movie and you know the person's going to go in the basement and they go in anyway, and you're sitting there going, don't go in the basement, don't go in the basement. Why are you going in the basement? Like, it's part of every formulaic script that exists in the horror genre. People go in the basement, and yet you go in the basement, you know something there is waiting for you and it's not going to be a good scenario for you, and yet you go to the basement. Well, the basement becomes part of the air you breathe. It rises up from the rest of the lower level of the house, and it comes up and it fills the space. And it's just there. You're used to it. It wears you down to the point where our past and our present and our future all sort of merge into one space. So we can't tell the difference between what happened to us before, what's going on right now, and all the worry that's going on about the future, right? So the past is pulling us into this depressed state. Future has us, our mind racing forward. Either way, we're not living in the now. And so in some sense, it's this really just wearing down of us where we just get used to being in the basement. We don't go in the basement when we know there's something bad there, but we don't even realize that there's anything bad there. So we end up living there. We bring down furniture. We try to make it comfortable. We have our stuffies from when we were a little kid. You know, we might have some flowers there. We can dress it up. The basement's still the basement no matter what you do. And it's still a scary place, but you don't realize it's scary because you're so worn down. Another thing that goes on is we are bringing the past into the present. Part of that past is trauma. Many people are used to trauma. We were either neglected or abused somehow, and we may not even realize that it was abuse at the time because we're so used to it. It's like this club that we've been initiated into when we're a really young age. So we don't realize that we are in the basement. Whether it's we were blatantly abused verbally, sexually, physically, or it was neglect, emotional neglect. You know, your needs weren't met. You had a depressed parent. Your parent was drinking. There was no food. Nobody seemed to care about you, right? And all of a sudden, this really shiny person comes in and you're basking in the glow of the shine, right? They're moving in. They're bringing in furniture, taking up residence in your house, in the basement. They're waiting there for you. You know, you can open the window in the basement. It's still a basement. The other thing that I really want you to think about is this effect of trauma. There was a study called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. It's been going on for years, and you can look this up. It is a number of items that you endorse, and whatever the score is at the end of that for you, the total, the endorsement of traumatic events when you were a kid, what we think of as trauma. Now, sometimes people discount trauma because they're so used to being in the basement, so they don't realize, oh, you know, my parent went to jail, or I didn't have food in the fridge, my dad cheated on my mom, whatever the events. And by the way, this measure called, again, the ACE, it doesn't fully capture all the things that we might think of that go on for kids, like the affair of a parent, right? Divorce is on there though, right? And a lot of people though, they don't get divorced because they stick it out for the kid, and the kids see them emotionally disconnected because one doesn't trust the other, right? But this score is correlated, and here's a trippy thing, with adverse chronic health events, right? So if you look at that score, now it doesn't mean it's destiny, right? It doesn't mean that it's, 100% certainty that this is going to go on for you. So there's a lot of things that go into this correlational research, but it's something important to consider. We can change our present so that now we're not reliving a past that we were locked into as kids and then surrounding ourselves with unhealthy people, living in the basement, right? We can move locations, we can come out of the basement, we can go someplace else, we can have other people that are positive around us, right? You get so worn down living in the basement, sometimes your whole life, that you don't even realize you're there. You don't even realize the opportunity that you have to move. And I realize that moving can take effort. It's not, for a lot of people, it's not a one-time quick fix type thing. It is you planning, you preparing yourself, you taking some classes, you doing things that will help you have a better future. Not just a better today, but a better future. You need an exit plan. And in the back of your mind, you might be so used to the air you breathe and not realizing, maybe because of the past you had when you were younger, that, hey, this person isn't as bad as maybe what I had, and it's still not great. I mean, you deserve more. You deserve more. Just because you're used to living there doesn't mean you have to. You maybe drive to other neighborhoods, talk to some people who live there, start to visualize yourself living a different life, even if it's so hard. One thing that I think about doing is sometimes imagining the people we admire, those traits. And why is it that you can't have those traits? Those are in you. If you admire those traits, if you look at, I don't know, picture whoever it is that you're into, Brene Brown, Oprah, whoever it is, whoever you idolize. And I mean, these are just people anyway, people who probably endured hardship, but they figured out the secret sauce. And that is that you do have choice, that you can master your life, that you can take charge of yourself in the present and in the future. You can't rewrite the past. You can maybe change your interpretation of events. For some people, that might be going, hey, yeah, bad shit happened to me, right? It's accepting that was a bad thing. Whatever happened to you, it was bad. It doesn't mean you swim in it forever. You go, yeah, okay, what are the lessons I can take here? But it's honoring that you went through some hardship. You went through something that maybe other people don't even know you went through. Maybe you've pushed it down because it's just not a great thing to think about, but it sets you up to be where you are now. And that's not great. I mean, you might have some blessings. Maybe you have kids that you're like, oh, I love my kids. I wouldn't change a thing. But your children, if you have them, are learning basically how to be in a relationship from watching you, probably just as you learned on some level. Like maybe you sit there and you go, oh, well, it wasn't as bad as what I had when I was a kid, but they're learning. And what do you want them to learn? Do you want them to learn that this is how they're supposed to treat a partner, that this is how their mom should be treated, this is how their dad should be treated? Is that what you want them to learn? Probably not. You probably want something else for them. But guess what? When you limit your own beliefs, you limit what your children are now going to be capable of. You limit their future, their possibilities. You write, in some sense, a destiny for them about who they're going to be with in the future. You're giving them that template. You're wiring their brain that love is unhealthy, that you can't trust people, it's not safe, that you're living in a basement. So think of that, not to scare you, but maybe to get you to just start to think about other possibilities, because part of this is just realizing the fact that you're living in a space that is not at all helping you function in life. There's also so much research that talks about the impact of chronic stress on us. And if you're even dissociated, right, where you're compartmentalized so much and you're not feeling your feelings, we know that when people are really healthy, their thoughts, their emotions, and their actions are congruent. If you're walking on eggshells because the person you're with can't let you be who you are, that they can't take it, that's not going to be good for you. Forget about them. That's their choice if they want to be. You can't control anybody but yourself. You don't need to be eating your feelings. You don't need to be drinking at night. I mean, if you're noticing that you're coping in ways that are not the ways that you think you should be, and you know you are if you are, that's not saying a lot for you. That's not giving you the best chance possible. When you were born into the world, you were a clean slate. Yeah, maybe you were genetically predisposed to some things, but your environment turned on those genes. And you're keeping them turned on by being in the situation you're in more likely than not. Now, if the person you're with is willing to be self-reflective, which by the way is the opposite of someone who's narcissistic or characterological, cluster B, whatever, then that's great if they're willing to genuinely look, and you'll see a pattern of consistency. You'll see them actually showing up. And I think sometimes people go, is my partner a narcissist or just a jerk? A jerk can learn, not always, but there can be some overlap there because narcissism is on a spectrum. It's not just this black or white. We want to compartmentalize, and I can talk about this another day, but these categories of narcissism, right? They're either covert or overt. They are malignant or communal or whatever. It is the case that there's a sort of picture like a slider, right, in the spectrum that for different people, somebody who's narcissistic can show up differently. They know how to play the system. And once you flip that switch where you're no longer praising them, right? Because you're human and you have feelings. And if you're like, hey, I don't like the tone you have right now, or it could be something so simple. It could be like, let's go to this movie instead of that movie because we saw an action movie last time. And this time I want to see this. They're sitting there and they're taking stock and they're getting pissed off inside. And maybe they don't explode. Maybe that's not who you've got. Maybe you've got somebody who's more covert, but they are taking a tally. They're sitting there going, this person's keeping me from, I'm the one that should be making choices here. In any event, whoever you're with, if you're not able to be yourself, you know if you're not. You know that you've tucked down your emotions. You know that you watch the things you say. And in all relationships, it's a healthy thing to communicate. You don't say everything to your partner that's on your mind, right? Or at least not in the way that you might want to blurt out. Like, you try to find a way to be sensitive to it. But if you find you can't even do that, that's not good. And that's not everybody. Covert narcissists, sometimes you don't see it coming. You're completely blindsided. You might think they are amazing. You might think they're the bee's knees. They're not. They've got the same sense of entitlement, superiority, all of that, fragile ego. It just looks different. When I think of wolves in sheep's clothing, that's who comes to mind. Those might be the folks that are well revered by people. They would never know what goes on inside their head until that person snaps and you are no longer the person that's giving them narcissistic supply. So I'm going to put a link down to a video I made about covert narcissism that's pretty brief. I'm going to put a link down below about the ACE. You can look at that. Keep in mind that it's increasing your awareness if you know what your ACE score is, but it can be hard to see that, right? Because it is correlated to negative health outcomes, not just psychological, right? We're talking coronary heart disease, cancer, things like that. So you have one life, depending on what you believe, but we've got one go around, in our lifetime, I think. And it's, what do you want to do? Do you want to live with regret? Whose life is it? Who gets to make the choices in how you want to live, right? Do you want to cut 5 years off your life for a person that, who knows, probably not going to change if they haven't by now, if you're watching videos about narcissism. And I love the fact that narcissism, there's so much education about it. But if you're watching any videos about narcissism, there's a there you should probably pay attention to. There is a better way of living. Take care of yourself and stay tuned for more. Thanks.